Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. I am Kevin Gordon, a conservative radio talk show host in the greater Cincinnati area. I have an opinion and I'm not afraid to use it. You can find out more about me by going to my Facebook page and clicking on the About link, and you can go to my LinkedIn page and view my profile there as well. Today's topic, liberal hysteria and their anti-gun crusade. In the wake of the shooting of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, that killed 17 people, 3 adults and 14 children, the battle over guns is intensified. But let's get one thing straight right from the start. This isn't about safety. This isn't about protecting our children. This is liberals, with the help of the spoon-fed regurgitators in the mainstream media, manipulating and exploiting a tragedy to advance their agenda. This is about control over all of us through gun confiscation. If liberals were truly concerned about safety, they would be looking for real solutions and not just knee-jerk reactions. Every time there is a shooting in this country, all we hear are calls for more gun laws, more background checks, talking about closing gun show loopholes and banning assault weapons, when in fact they can't even identify and they cannot even define what an assault weapon is. It just so happens that this particular gun looks scarier than this gun over here, even though it has the same shooting and same killing power. And every time they're asked the question, how would this law that you're proposing have stopped this shooting or any other shooting? The reaction you get is, yes, crickets, because they don't have an answer. Democrats seized power in 2009. And I use the word seize power because if you go back to 1994 when Republicans got control of the House of Representatives, Peter Jennings was on the air talking about the Republicans seized control of the House today. And every time the Republicans either win a House seat or take over a governorship, they seize power. So I'm just using the phrase here. Democrats seized power in 2009. It also happened to be the 10th anniversary of the Columbine massacre, the Columbine school shooting. If you go to Wikipedia and look up Columbine High School Massacre, printed out that story would be 28 pages long. There is not one mention in there that Democrat Bill Clinton was president. Not one mention. But let's look back to 2009. Democrat Barack Obama became president. Democrats controlled the House. Democrats had a filibuster-proof Senate. They could have passed anything that they wanted to. During the 8 years of the Obama presidency, there were 136 school shootings. 136. Now, not all of these ended in fatalities or even in injury. Sometimes it was just a gun discharged at these schools. But 136 school shootings. That is an average of 17 per year. 17 per year. Now, when they had all this power, when they had all this control, did they do anything regarding common sense gun laws? Well, let's ask them that question. Did you do anything during that time? Again, crickets. Because basically they have no solution. They just have the knee-jerk reaction. We are only 1 year into the Trump presidency, a little over a year. And you would think Republicans have been in charge for a decade, decades. Every issue, I don't care whether it's DACA, heroin, income inequality, gender equity, infrastructure, everything's a crisis now. Everything is blown out of proportion. We need to say loud and often Why in the hell, when you guys had power, didn't you solve these problems? Again, the presidency, the House of Representatives, a filibuster-proof Senate, and they did nothing. Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago, who was a senior advisor to President Clinton, a Democrat, again, back in the 90s, former Democrat congressman from Illinois, and Obama's White House chief of staff, once famously said, "You never let a serious crisis go to waste." Liberals are following that game plan to the letter. But hey, don't look at their record. Rahm Emanuel, again, mayor of Chicago. There's a website called Hey Jackass, illustrating Chicago values. The final numbers are in for 2017. Total people shot, 3,561. That is an average of 9.8 per day. 9.8 per day. Shot and killed, 625. That's 1.7 per day. Total homicides, 674. So other than guns, murders by guns, 625, there were 54 other homicides, murders in Chicago. And most of these murders and these shootings were with young black people, black children, black men, and black women. Apparently, liberals only care when white suburban kids are killed. But guns are the problem? Really? Well, the fact is that guns in this country, the availability is falling. Let me pull this up for you so you can see it a little bit better. Let me pull this up. So you focus on that. Washington Post. Gun ownership is falling. American gun ownership drops to its lowest level in 40 years. Again, Washington Post. The percent of Americans owning guns is at a near 40-year low in the latest CBS News poll released this month. This was a story from back in June of 2016. According to the survey, which was conducted among 1,001 Americans in the aftermath of the Orlando nightclub shooting, 36% of U.S. adults either own a firearm personally or live with someone who does. That's the lowest rate of gun ownership in the CBS poll going back to 1978. That's down 17 points from the highest recorded rate in 1994, and nearly 10 percentage points down also from 2017. See, if you look at this, let's focus in on that. You have over here, you have 1978. You have a peak here in 1994, which is, by the way, when the assault weapons ban came into law during the Clinton administration. And then you have the rate falling to the point here, right there, okay? Now, different national polls tend to show slightly different rates of gun ownership. The latest household gun ownership rate in the General Social Survey in 2014 was 32%. The October 2015 Gallup survey showed a higher rate of 43%. But the downward trend in this article talks about the downward trend in gun ownership remains consistent across all these national polls. According to the Gallup, gun ownership has fallen by 10 percentage points since its peak in 1993. The General Social Survey showed a 20% drop since the mid-1970s. Now, there may be more guns out there. There may be far more guns, but the availability has decreased. In other words, people in their homes may at one time have owned 5 guns. They may own 10 now, but the number of households that have guns in them is falling. But that's not good enough for liberals. No, they've got to attack the NRA. The NRA is the problem. The NRA has too much power. The NRA has too much influence over our Congress. Really? This is an organization that is established. Their sole mission is to establish to protect the Second Amendment. Can you name for me an organization that is established to protect our First Amendment rights? Freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. Can you name the organization? I can't either, because nobody would ever think that we would take the right of free speech, the right of assembly, the right of the freedom of the press, and freedom of religion and take that away from people. I've heard liberals say that the NRA donations to the NRA is stained in blood. Yet those same liberals will act as though that donations to Planned Parenthood are just and moral. Planned Parenthood far outspends the NRA. The Washington Post, now this is a story from back in 2017, in October of 2017. The Washington Post, Aaron Williams, put together a graphic showing how the NRA has contributed $4.2 million to current members of Congress, primarily Republicans, since 1998. But then the Federalist, Sean Davis, came up with some very different numbers. It seems Planned Parenthood, the nation's largest abortion seller and recipient over $500 million in taxpayer funding every year, spent $38 million in the 2016 election alone. Democrats were the recipients of the majority of that largesse, despite Planned Parenthood's CEO Cecil Roberts' laughable assertion that the organization is nonpartisan. The 10 worst mass shootings in the United States have claimed the lives of 265 people. Now, again, this was as of 2016 in October. But since Roe v. Wade, 1973, over 60 million babies have been aborted. And yet Planned Parenthood continues on opening mega killing centers in our cities, reaching into its deep pockets to fight every abortion restriction passed on the state and federal level, collecting $1.5 million in tax money every single day. And where are these abortion centers located? Primarily in low-income African American communities. In this article from the Daily Caller, we can't pretend mass shootings are not a problem for our nation, but neither should we continue to overlook an organization that takes the lives of more than 320,000 human beings every year and pays lawmakers to look the other way. Democrat Hubert Humphrey served as vice president under Lyndon Johnson from 1965 to 1969. A quote from him on November the 1st, 1977, 4 years after Roe v. Wade. The moral test of a government is how that government treats those who are in the dawn of life. Oh my, how far the Democratic Party has come since then. You can't even be a pro-life Democrat anymore. You're not welcome in the party. American writer and novelist Pearl Buck, best known for her novel A Good Earth, winner of the Pulitzer Prize in 1932 and recipient of the Nobel Prize for Literature, wrote, quote, "The test of a civilization is the way that it cares for its helpless members." Is there anything more helpless than a baby in utero? We no longer place a value on children. We no longer place a value on human life, and the kids know it. For years, liberals have chipped away at the cornerstone of society, the family. And radical liberal feminists have chipped away at the cornerstone of the family, motherhood. In 2012, Hillary Rosen, a Democratic Party strategist, attacked Ann Romney, the wife of Republican nominee Mitt Romney, a mother of 5 who suffers from MS, by saying she, quote, has actually never worked a day in her life. Just the other day, I read a story about Melinda Gates chastising women, stay-at-home mothers, how they're wasting their lives, how they are not being productive members of society, and how they are not living up to their potential because they're not producing anything to this economy. Yeah, we value motherhood in this country. Yet, who are taking care of these kids? If the mothers aren't, what kind of a society, what kind of a productive society puts children off to the side while other people take care of them? You're not a productive member of society? Feminists are all about choice, but they're only about the choices they want you to make. You know how you can tell liberals are not serious about stopping gun violence? Just watch how crazy they get when anything other than gun control is mentioned. At a local event in Covington, the day after the Parkland shooting, our Governor Bevin, was in town, and Covington, Kentucky is the next city over. I live in Campbell County, Kentucky, which is near Cincinnati. The Inquirer reporter, actually he's more of a propagandist than a reporter, asked the governor about the shooting. Now, Governor Bevin is great at answering questions. He always speaks off the cuff. He hardly ever uses any notes. He speaks directly from the heart. He knows what he's talking about, and he believes in what he talks about. He's quick on his feet, and when you ask him a question, he'll give you a long answer. I've watched interviews with him where it's a town hall meeting, and you usually expect to see about 15, 20 questions. They only manage to get 2 or 3 questions in because he will give you an extremely long answer. But anyway, I watched this interview and I read the story. Any semblance between what was said and what the story said is purely coincidental. The Inquirer wrote this headline: School shootings. Kentucky Governor Matt Bevin blames violent video games and shows, not guns. Opening line from this story: it's not the guns, it's the video games. What Bevin said was, we need to have an honest conversation as to what should and should not be allowed in the United States as it relates to things being put in the hands of the young people. He talked about how, now, he misspoke. He said that per capita the number of guns are down. But he talked about the availability of guns as well in the same conversation. He talked about how when he was a kid, how people used to bring guns to school. They'd bring them in their pickup truck. He lived in the rural area in the Northeast. And he said people never even thought about shooting people. He said something has to have happened in the last 40 to 50 years. It's not the guns. The guns are the same. It's the people that are using them that have changed. And he pointed to, and he uses an example of where in video games, you get extra credit for going back and finishing somebody off. Now, what this propagandist from the Inquirer did was Matt Bevin gave this long answer. And what he did is he chopped it into paragraphs, and like he was asking questions that were these paragraphs. When the only question he asked was, do you have anything to say about the shooting? And when Governor Bevin talked about something's going on in this society that is affecting these children, his only other question was, do you have any data to back that up? I have never heard this reporter, this propagandist, ever ask a question, a follow-up question like that of any liberal. Everything they say is gospel according to him. He puts in his story here. Why is he convinced that video games, not guns? Because when he went to school in New England, students would carry guns to show and tell. What the governor did also say was, Go back before this existed. How many children walked into other schools and slaughtered other children? What more evidence do you need? The people who say there's no evidence are full of crap. And then he follows up this propagandist. Bevan wouldn't say what he thinks the threshold should be for too much violence in entertainment. What he asked for was to start a conversation, not just focus on the guns. But you know what? This propagandist got his message out. And he got his agenda going because Newsweek picked up on this, and this was the headline. Guns aren't responsible for school shootings. Blame music and video games. Republican governor. Newsweek picked it up, so more power to this reporter, this propagandist. Governor Bevan isn't alone when he says, "We have become desensitized to death. We have become desensitized to killing. We have become desensitized to empathy for our fellow man, and it's coming at an extraordinary price. And we have got to look at the root cause of this." And he's got some statistics. He's got some information to back him up. He's got stories out there. I've got a story here. Was written by, was on Modern Family, Your Modern Family. The scary truth about what's hurting our kids. CNN recently interviewed Dr. Jean Twenge, author of iGen. Dr. Twenge started doing research 25 years ago on generational differences. When 2011-2012 hit, she saw something that would scare her to the core. This is the year when those having iPhones went over the 50% mark. This was the year more kids starting to say that they felt sad, hopeless, and useless, that they couldn't do anything right, which is classic depression. They felt left out and lonely. There is a 50% increase in clinical level of depression between 2011 and 2015, a substantial increase in suicide rate. Now, looking at this story from CNN, talking about not hanging out with their friends, the trend is falling. Notice that? Less dating, again, numbers are falling, again, put up by CNN. More likely to feel lonely. Look how that is on the upward trend. Less likely to get enough sleep because of the visual stimulation. And there's studies talking about how if you look at your iPhone before you go to bed at night, how it kind of tends to ramp you up and keep you awake. Look at that, not enough sleep. Why is this happening? Why are kids more depressed than because of electronics? Think about when we were in school. We didn't know every time there was a get-together. We weren't invited to, and we didn't see pictures of every outing, every game, or every party. We didn't care about what we looked at when we were hanging around with our friends. Now, this again was written by a woman. I didn't care, I didn't wear makeup. I didn't care if I had to write my hair fixed just right because the worry of a phone or a camera wasn't there. Think about bullies. When we left school, we left them. If teasing happened, it didn't happen at home. It didn't happen so publicly. Everyone couldn't see it or know what they were teasing other kids about since they weren't there. Now it's public knowledge and anyone can join in and watch. In other words, when I was a kid, if there was bullying going on, there's maybe 5, 6 kids around, but there weren't cameras. Nowadays, the people have their cameras. They're videoing this, and then they're sharing it through Instagram. And by the time it passes, there are 10, 15, 20 people that know about it. By the time you get home from school, almost everybody knows about it. And you're seeing the news feeds. You're seeing the information coming through on your phone. So you can't escape it even at home. The silent tragedy, another story. The silent tragedy hurting our kids, affecting today's kids. This is written by Victoria Prude, an occupational therapist. 1 in 5 children has mental health problems. 43% increase in ADHD. 37% increase in teen depression, and 100% increase in suicide rates of kids 10 to 14 years old. Today's children are deprived of the fundamentals of healthy childhood, such as emotionally available parents, clearly defined limits and guidance, responsibilities, balanced nutrition and adequate sleep, movement and outdoors, creative play, social interaction, opportunities for unstructured times, and boredom. Boredom, once in a while, is good because it helps you create other things to possibly do with your time. And this whole idea of activity for kids. Nowadays, after lunch, these kids are only getting 10, 15 minutes worth of recess. They're not out there burning off their energy. They've got this pent-up energy. And I saw a study the other day. 30% of kids feel disengaged from their parents. They don't feel like they're connected to their parents. And the parents live in the home with them. Because the parents come home and they're on their iPad. They're on their phones. They're texting. They're on Twitter. They're social media. They're not connecting with their kids. Instead, children are being served with digitally distracted parents, indulgent parents who let them rule the world, sense of entitlement rather than responsibility, inadequate sleep and unbalanced nutrition, sedentary indoor lifestyle, endless stimulation, technological babysitters, instant gratification, and absence of dull moments. These are the kinds of things that are affecting. And on a side note, take the smoking debate. Smoking is no longer, at one point, there were magazine ads, there were ads on television. Now, mind you, this is still a legal product, but it's not allowed to be advertised in magazines or on television. It's gotten to the point now where you can't have an actor or an actress on screen in a TV show or a movie smoking a cigarette. Why? Because that 10 seconds of seeing an actor smoke, that if a child looks at that person that they admire or they idolize, this is going to affect them and they're going to smoke. Yet we're not supposed to think that seeing that same actor creating violence, having sex, glorifying drugs over a 3 hour, hour and a half long movie or an hour long TV show, that this isn't going to have any effect on kids. But by God, that 10 seconds of a kid seeing somebody smoking, that's going to force them to smoke. But not all the sex that they see, not all the violence that they see, and not all the drugs that they see. And don't you dare, when you're talking about any of this, talk about morality or religion. Or people start, like Joy Behar, will question your mental health. I wish I could play this recording for you, but the background noise and the hate-filled audience and the cackling of the people up on the stage was so overpowering that you really can't distinguish some of the words. And I couldn't quite, one of these days I'll have the sophisticated equipment to drown out that background noise. But apparently Omarosa is on some reality show, and she was talking to a group of people, and she was talking about Vice President Mike Pence and his religion, how he prays and how he talks to God and how he believes that God talks to him. Joy Behar, it's one thing to talk to Jesus. It's another thing when Jesus talks to you. That's called mental illness, if I'm not correct. Hearing voices. And all the audience, they were laughing. Those hate-filled people on The View, they were chuckling, they were laughing, they were ridiculing it. It was disgusting. Apparently Oprah Winfrey didn't get the memo because within a couple of days, she was interviewed by People magazine. Oprah Winfrey reveals the one thing that can make her run for president. Quote, God, if you think I'm supposed to run, you gotta tell me. And it better be so clear that not even I can miss it. And I haven't gotten that. So Oprah Winfrey's waiting for God to talk to her, and that's okay because she's a liberal and she's pro-choice. Because to liberals, that's all that matters. If you're pro-choice, that's fine. You can get away with anything. Why don't our children feel as though there are any moral absolutes anymore? Why are there no moral facts? I saw a story, and of all places, the New York Times. Why our children don't think there are moral facts. And this was written by Justin McBrayer. The misleading distinction between fact and opinion is embedded in Common Core. A few weeks ago, I learned that students are exposed to this sort of thinking well before crossing the threshold of higher education. When I went to visit my son's second grade open house, I found a troubling pair of signs hanging over the bulletin board. They read, "Fact, something that is true about a subject and can be tested or proven. Opinion, what someone thinks, feels, or believes." He goes on to write, facts become personal or person relative. Something that might be a fact for me, something that I can prove, may not be a fact for you because if I'm telling you this, it's merely an opinion. He uses the example, the relativity, E equals mc squared. I can't prove that. I can't do the experiment on that. Somebody else did and proved it. Now, is that an opinion or is that a fact? He cites some worksheets that these kids are assigned, and when they take these tests, or he said, investigate my son's homework. And I see other examples of these examples online. Kids are asked to sort facts from opinions, and without fail, every value claim is labeled as an opinion. Here's a little test devised from the questions available on fact versus opinion worksheets. Copying homework assignments is wrong. Cursing in school is inappropriate behavior. All men are created equal. It is worth sacrificing some personal liberties to protect our country from terrorism. It is wrong for people under the age of 21 to drink alcohol. Vegetarians are healthier than people who eat meat. Drug dealers belong in prison. The answer to each one of these is that is an opinion. It's not a fact. So if you reduce these things down to only things that can be proven and everything else is an opinion, it's not a fact, then of course these kids aren't going to have any type of grounding. What about the impact of drugs, illegal and legal drugs, on our kids? Heroin now kills more people in this country than guns. Last year, drug overdoses claimed 50,000 lives in the U.S. That's enough to fill most stadiums. Gun deaths also increased in 2017, but the estimated number in 2017, because the actual numbers haven't been finalized and whatever, 15,549 people were killed by guns in the United States in 2017, excluding suicides. 15,549, yet 50,000 people died from heroin overdoses. These same liberals that are concerned about guns aren't concerned about securing our border. They're not concerned about stopping the flow of drugs into the country. 9 states have already legalized pot, and many more are considering it. Not because they think it's a good thing, but they see a revenue stream. We've got people in Kentucky here that has actually proposed a law for that. And they're not talking about the benefits of marijuana. They're not talking about anything being good about it. It's just that, hey, we can tax it, and because we've got a pension problem, that'll solve our revenue stream and we can tax it. Hopefully, there's enough conservatives in our state that will stop this in our tracks. What about legal drugs? Every mass shooting over the last 20 years has one thing in common, and it's not guns. According to a story here, Jewish World Review, Greg Crosby. Every mass shooting over the last 20 years has one thing in common. It's not guns, it's psychiatric drugs. According to multiple sources and research done over many years, the overwhelming evidence is that the largest common factor in these incidences is the fact that the perpetrators were either actively taking powerful psychotropic drugs or they had at some point in the immediate past before they committed their crimes. In an article reported in Natural News, multiple credible scientific studies going back to more than a decade, as well as internal documents from certain pharmaceutical companies that suppressed the information, show that SSRI drugs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, have well-known but unreportable side effects, including but not limited to suicide and other violent behavior. Prozac is one of these drugs. It's an antidepressant. Mainstream media has documented over 4,500 reported cases from around the world of aberrant or violent behavior by those taking these powerful drugs. Let's look at some of the ones that are, some of the instances that they list in this story. Now, these aren't in chronological order, and I have another story here that I'll get to in a minute. And so these are not in chronological order, but here they are. May 21st, 1998, Springfield, Oregon. 15-year-old Kip Kinkle murdered his parents and then went to school, where he opened fire on students in a cafeteria, killing 2 and wounding 25. Kinkle had been taking the antidepressant Prozac. Kinkle had been attending anger control classes and had previously been under the care of a psychologist. Columbine, Colorado, April 20th, 1999. 18-year-old Eric Harris and his accomplice, Dylan Klebold, killed 12 students and a teacher and wounded 26 others before killing themselves. Harris was on the antidepressant Luvox. Klebold's medical records remain sealed. They remain sealed. 18 years later, still sealed. Both shooters have been in anger management classes and had undergone counseling, as Harris had been seeing a psychiatrist before the shooting. Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, September 21st, 2011. 14-year-old Christian Helms had 2 pipe bombs in his backpack when he shot and wounded Socastee High School's resource police officer. The officer was able to stop the student before he could do anything further. As evidence showed, he was planning an attack similar to Columbine High School. He had been taking drugs for attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, and depression. Media ignoring one crucial factor in Florida shooting, school shooting. The information about the perpetrator emerges. A relative confides to the newspaper that the, quote, troubled youth who committed the mass murder was on psychiatric medications. Those powerful little understood mind-altering drugs with fearsome side effects, including suicide ideation and even homicidal ideation. Yet the predictable response from the press is always the same. Not only a lack of curiosity, but a disdain for anyone who even raises this question. In the case of Nicholas Cruz, the 19-year-old Florida mass shooter, his mother-in-law, or his mother's sister, Barbara Kumbatovic, told the Miami Herald that she believed Cruz was on medication to deal with his emotional fragility. This is strikingly similar to reports right after the 2013 school massacre in Newtown, Connecticut, when Mark and Louisa Tambascio, family friends of shooter Adam Lanza, and his mother were interviewed by 60 Minutes. They talked about the type of drugs he was on, the fact that the mother pulled him out of school and was homeschooling him because of his behavior disorders. Some of the stories they cite here: Paducah, Kentucky in late 1997, 14-year-old Michael Carneal, son of a prominent attorney, traveled to Heath High School and started shooting students in a prayer meeting taking place in the school's lobby, killing 3 and leaving another paralyzed. Carneal reportedly was on Ritalin. John Hinckley, age 25, took 4 Valium 2 hours before shooting and almost killing President Ronald Reagan in 1981. In the assassination attempt, Hinckley also wounded Press Secretary James Brady, Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy, and policeman Thomas Delahanty. Andrea Yates, most heart-rendering crimes in modern history, drowned all 5 of her children, aged 7 years down to 6 months, in a bathtub, insisting inner voices commanded her to kill her children. She had become increasingly psychotic over the course of several years. Yates had been taking the antidepressant Effexor. In November 2005, more than 4 years after Yates drowned her children, Effexor manufacturer Wyeth Pharmaceuticals quietly added homicidal ideation to the drug's list of rare adverse events. Paxils, known adverse drug reactions. According to the drug's FDA-approved label, they include mania, insomnia, anxiety, agitation, confusion, amnesia, depression, paranoid reaction, psychosis, hostility, delirium, hallucinations, abnormal thinking, depersonalization, and lack of emotion. Every SSRI antidepressant, and again, that is short for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Every one of these drugs carries the black box warning. It is the FDA's warning label, the government's most serious drug warning of increased risk of suicidal thinking and behavior known as suicidality in young adults aged 18 to 24. Why in the hell are some of these products actually out on the market if they're having those many side effects and this effect on kids from the age of 18 to 24? Pharmaceuticals manufacturers are understandably nervous about politically connecting their highly lucrative drugs to murderous violence, which may be why we rarely ever see any confirmation of those first-day reports from grief-stricken relatives who confide to journalists that the perpetrator was taking psychiatric drugs. Finally, why are the FBI, police, and the school out of this conversation? Why aren't they being talked about? The FBI said it failed to act on a tip about the suspected Florida shooter. In the story, FBI said it failed to act on a tip about the suspected Florida shooter, potential for violence. This was in the Washington Post. It goes on to describe the different times that different things about him and that they were warned. And I have that a little bit further here. But was this an isolated instance? No. In the Daily Caller story, the FBI keeps missing mass shooters before it's too late. The FBI was warned about Nicholas Cruz after he posted on YouTube saying that he was going to become, quote, a professional school shooter. The agency said they couldn't identify the user who made the threat, despite the fact that Cruz was posting under his real name. The person close to Cruz warned the FBI last month, or the month before, that he had this desire to kill people and could carry out a school shooting. The FBI admitted on Friday, 2 days after the shooting, that they failed to act on the tip. Other mass shooters, they've missed these. Dylan Roof, who in 2015 shot 9 people at Black Church in Charleston. You remember that? Was allowed to purchase his weapon in part because of errors in FBI agents during the background check process. Paul shooter Omar Mateen, who pledged allegiance to ISIS before killing 49 people at the Orlando nightclub. The FBI investigated Mateen twice before the slaughter and ruled him not to be a threat both times. The FBI knew that Fort Hood shooter Army Major Nidal Hassan had been in contact with Al-Qaeda terrorist Anwar al-Awlaki, but declined to investigate him. A congressional probe found that the FBI had failed to alert the Army about Hassan and that the shooting could and should have been prevented. Hassan killed 13 people and wounded dozens others in the 2009 shooting. The FBI similarly missed opportunities to stop Tamerlan Zanarev, one of the brothers behind the 2013 Boston bombing, a government review found. Russia, nasty Russia, evil Russia, had warned the United States, that Zanarev had associations with Islamic terrorists, leading an FBI-led task force to question the future terrorists. The agent who interviewed Zanarev closed the probe, quote, having found no link or nexus to terrorism. The task force was alerted a year later that Zanarev was leaving the country for Dagestan, but declined to interview him or stop him from leaving the country. FBI agents later said the failure to interview Zanarev was a huge error, according to Boston Magazine. Another school shooter who was on the FBI's radar killed 2 students at a New Mexico high school just 2 months ago. Now, this didn't rise to the level of a mass shooting, because for a mass shooting, it's got to be 4 people or more. This killed 2 people. Although the killer didn't meet the government's definition of a mass shooting, the shooter was known to the FBI. The agency investigated the shooter, 21-year-old William Atchison, in 2016 after he commented online about committing a mass shooting. Deputies were called to Cruz's home, Nicholas Cruz's home, 39 times over a 7-year period of time. The nature of these calls: mentally ill person, child/elderly abuse, domestic disturbance, and missing person. Made an alarming online comment about a recent mass shooting, quote, "Man, I can do so much better," he wrote. Florida shooter's former friend said she reported him to the school multiple times. This was on yahoo.com. Ariana Lopez said she reported Cruz to school officials multiple times between 2016 and 2017 after he began following her and her friends after school. Quote, "He used to sell knives out of his lunchbox, which I thought was like insane because you can't have knives in a school," Lopez said. He would talk about how he sympathized with Syrian terrorists and how people who oppose them should be killed. On the day of the shooting, more failures. Sources: Coral Springs police upset at some Broward deputies for not entering the school. This story was filed by Jake Tapper from CNN. Coral Springs police officers arrived at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida on February the 14th in the midst of the school shooting crisis. Many officers were surprised to find that not only the Broward County Sheriff's Deputy Scott Peterson, the armed school resource officer, had not entered the school building, but that 3 other Broward County Sheriff deputies were also outside the school and had not entered. Coral Springs sources tell CNN the deputies had their pistols drawn and were behind their vehicles, the sources said, and not one of them had gone into the school. When I see CNN scripting questions for town hall participants, Florida shooting survivor Colton Habe told CNN told me to stick to the script, the entire town hall scripted. When I see a report filed by Dana Loesch, who was with the NRA, here's the real story of what happened at CNN's garbage town hall. This is a report. She recounts what went on during this town hall meeting. They had music that was playing. They had montages that were flashing across the screen. They had a number of speakers from the school and from the community. They had the sheriff go out and speak. He mentioned special interest groups and membership in the NRA. They then brought the politicians out, and that was the first hour. After all this was already happening, after emotions were already high, and after CNN had put together and cranked up, really trying to wind people up and even more. I had no questions in advance. It was even weird the way they walked us out, because it was like entering, like you were a boxer or with the WWE. It's kind of like going into, the Roman Colosseum and watching the gladiators, burning them, taking them in, sending the Christians off to be eaten by lions. You were walking on stage and they had music playing. You had to walk in aisles and these people were screaming, and you had to walk towards the stage. She describes how this was in a giant arena where there was 360 all the way around. In other words, they were surrounded, in effect, by a mob that had been ramped up for an hour prior to them coming out. Dana Loesch said that her security detail walked towards the stage. Audience members shouted at her phrases like murderer, child killer, burn her. What, they were going to burn her at the stake? Jake Tapper, CNN, chief Washington correspondent, anchor of their show The Lead, was the moderator. I don't know if he lost control or if that was CNN's intention, because CNN president Jeff Zucker was there. When we were backstage getting ready to go out, Jeff Zucker came in. He doesn't just show up for nothing. This is not a day at the ballpark. It was weird. When I see the Women's March organizers organizing and coordinating these gun protests, Women's March organizers are planning a national school walkout, marching to Soros' tune. 100 Women March partners funded by left-wing billionaire Soros. Now, George Soros, an admitted Nazi, when he was 14 years old, he is a Jew, by the way. His job as a young Nazi was to go out and point out who were the Jews so that they could be sent off to the concentration camps. He went around with the people and actually confiscated the property. He said that was the happiest time of his life. These left-wing organizations don't mind accepting money from this Nazi, yet anytime a Republican or a conservative speak up, we're the Nazis. Yet they accept money from a Nazi. You can't, this stuff is just too unbelievable. These left-wing groups that George Soros is funding, some of the ones that receive money from him: American Civil Liberties Union, Human Rights Watch, Planned Parenthood, Center for American Progress, Evergreen, Giffords, Gabby Giffords Group, Move On, Women's March LA. When I was doing some research for this, I got to mention this. Billionaire George Soros, Nazi George Soros, spent $33 million bankrolling the Ferguson demonstrations to create an echo chamber and drive national protests. This was a story that was filed back in 2015, so he's got a history of this. When I see all this happening, I know this is not about safety, protection of our children, common sense gun laws, or whatever the hell they're saying it's for. I know this is not a grassroots effort. This is planned. This is being coordinated by the left wing. And you know it too. To sum this up, as a society, we no longer value life. Movies, video games, and music glorify violence. Religion and morality have become a punchline. Kids are feeling more and more isolated. Parents are not connecting with their children enough. We are ignoring the effects of psychotropic drugs. Law enforcement and schools must stop ignoring these problems and the warning signs and do something about bullying in schools. The Second Amendment, make no mistake, is under attack. Private gun ownership is under attack. They must not win. We must push back. Thank you for tuning in. Please share this video. In future podcasts, I look forward to bringing you the incomplete stories and the stories completely ignored by the spoon-fed regurgitators in the mainstream media. Thanks for listening. Take care.